Well, the Georgia Bulldogs looked like a team that took the challenge of making the college football playoff personally against Tennessee at Sanford in what was a vintage Georgia victory. No sacks allowed to Carson Beck, no takeaways from Tennessee, just 2 tackles behind the line of scrimmage for them, and we got vintage Carson Beck, who threw for over 300 yards, didn't throw any interceptions, the 2 TDs that put them in front 24-17. And then what I thought was interesting is they got good enough play out of Nate Frazier, 18 rushes for 66 yards in this one. It felt for me like the game was teetering coming out of halftime. It felt like Tennessee was going to have some momentum coming out of this thing. It's 17 up. We think that the defense has done enough to stymie the Georgia offense until such a time as the dam begins to break. And it was very clear to me that Nico Iamaleava was going to get outplayed tonight, outdueled tonight by Carson Beck. And I got to tell you, man, that's the story for me. Nico Iamaleava was 17 of 30 for 146 in this game, even as Dylan Sampson had a really great game. 19 rushes for over 100 yards in this one. But again, you're allowing Georgia to dictate to you on offense, and on third downs, it wasn't as if both teams were great defensively. Like, I'm looking at Georgia, who was pretty good, 8 of 13 on third down, and Tennessee, who was 10 of 17. It's just when you had an opportunity to get a stop that you needed and get the ball back to the offense, Tennessee couldn't go get points. Not in the second half. Georgia could go get at least 7. And then as the game is becoming one about clock management and attrition, I'm just watching Carson Beck make plays with his legs. I'm watching him find guys that are open, even as they're making mistakes. Like, there was one play near the end of the fourth quarter where Carson Beck is falling back just before the ball is snapped. You saw that. I think Kirk Herbstreit caught this in like real time. It should have been a false start, but that was just it, right? That's the things that happen and go your way when it is your night. And not for nothing, Sanford is one of the more intimidating environments to play in all of college football. This win does a lot to help Georgia's case for the college football playoff. Number one, you don't want to come to them with a third loss and say, hey, please make us one of the 12 best teams in college football. You want to have a top 10 win against the team at the top of the SEC standings coming into this thing. That is what Georgia was able to do all in one fell swoop. You beat the team at the top of the SEC standings while A&M dispatches New Mexico State, but that's a non-conference game. You put yourself back in the mix as one of the 12 best teams, and you get to tell people once again, hey, look, our losses are to Alabama and Ole Miss, 2 teams that we think can make the college football playoff. Whether or not they make the conference championship, certainly it would help their cause. But Alabama's got a win against Georgia, right? Even as they got the really great win against LSU, and that doesn't particularly help Alabama's case. It certainly doesn't do a whole lot to make you feel less about Georgia. Like, that's the other thing. Florida's a good football team with DJ Lagway at quarterback, and they got to show that against LSU. I still wonder if DJ Lagway was able to play the rest of that game against Georgia. Are we looking at a third loss for Georgia going into this game and then them knocking off a top 10 team, which would have really made this entire thing very interesting? But also this win boxes out what we think is an ACC title contender or even Big 12 title contender, because now you don't really have the room to discuss, say, Miami in a loss to Southern Methodist or Southern Methodist in a loss to Miami or Clemson in a loss to either one. You really are going to look at the ACC title game winner getting in with one of those top 4 highest ranked Group of 5 champions, or Power 4 champions. And then you're going to look at the Big 12, which is probably going to end up being BYU or Colorado if things stay the way that they have been. And then you're going to look at the Big 10 and the SEC. Oregon got a scare from Wisconsin earlier tonight. They come back to win that game 16-13. Basically comes down to Dylan Gabriel's able to make plays and Braden Locke is not. Again, similar things with Georgia and Nico Iamaleava. I want to commend Tennessee for how it played this game. Like, I thought the game plan in and of itself was good. And if you got the kind of Carson Beck that everybody else seemed to be getting from Carson Beck up until now, it's easy to see how Georgia would lose this game at home and how Tennessee would have this resounding win against them. As it is, Tennessee has lost 8 in a row to Georgia, and Kirby Smart doesn't know what it's like to lose to Tennessee, and that is the next big hurdle for the Volunteers to overcome. They were able to dispatch Alabama for the first time in 16 years a couple of years ago. They were able to become the number one team in the country, and then they met this Georgia Bulldog train that just put them away. And it feels like, for whatever reason now, Georgia owns Tennessee. And you know what? In a year where you got to have this win against this one-loss program that's Tennessee, you go get it. So now you have the head-to-head against Tennessee, and you have the head-to-head against Texas. Two of the best teams in college football going into this, two top 10 teams. I think now all Georgia's got to do is win out, and we're going to talk about them being one of the 12 best teams in college football. I also think that down the road here, the Tennessee conversation becomes interesting. That win they have against Alabama might be the most important thing that they do all year, especially if somehow, some way, Alabama finds its way back in this thing. Now, they beat up on Mercer today, 52-7. Jalen Milroe had 3 total TDs. But again, we're looking at what they're going to do against Oklahoma. It sucks for them that Oklahoma's not any good this year, so that win for them isn't going to do what it might if Oklahoma had a number next to their name. And Auburn is sorry. So are they going to win the next two? We would think so, right? We think that they get to 10 wins. It's how does the committee look at Tennessee, and how does committee look at Tennessee's win against Alabama at home versus Tennessee's loss to Georgia on the road and Tennessee's loss to Arkansas on the road. Arkansas, who pushed Texas into the deep water, also got stunned by Ole Miss and again beat Tennessee. It is a really difficult team to nail down. I think Arkansas is what happens when things don't go your way and your name is South Carolina, right? South Carolina got a great win against Missouri today. Also got a bugaboo off for their back. 20 of 31 for 353 yards and 5 TDs for Lenore Sellers, who turned into a superhuman in that game and needed to be, because that was a tight game. Ended up winning that game 34-30 with Brady Cook on the field. I'm really fascinated now. I really do want to talk about the middle of the SEC, particularly as it pertains to Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, and see what the committee thinks, because I got some work to do on my top 25 before I come back to you and talk about this a little bit later on, late tonight, I think, because Kansas and BYU is ongoing at this time. I also got to see a really great Colorado performance tonight, but LSU might not be in the top 25 on Sunday. I'll have to take a look at that. Louisiana might be in the top 25 for the first time this year. Tulane is clinching a spot in the American Championship game. They could end up as the highest-ranked Group of 5 champion, depending on how you feel about them in Boise State. If Army beats Notre Dame, though, cancel Christmas. Like, they beat Notre Dame, they win the ACC, or the AAC, that's going to be your highest Group of 5 champion, or highest-ranked Group of 5 champion, boxing out a Boise State that has a loss to Oregon, who's the number 1 team in the country, but needed to come back from 14 down to beat, San Jose State 42-21. Ashton Jeanty needs 734 yards, by the way, to break Barry Sanders' single-season rushing record. All told, though, again, vintage Georgia performance. They took care of the football. They didn't turn the football over. They got nearly 350 yards passing out of Carson Beck. They got over 100 yards rushing on the ground without 2 of the better tailbacks available in Branson Robinson and Trevor Etienne. That's the other thing you're probably going to take into account if you're the committee. They did not have Trevor Etienne available to them, and yet and still they were able to go get this win against a top 10 team whose only loss is to Arkansas and who has a win against Alabama. Again, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, they all got Ole Miss, they got great resumes. I think one of those teams is going to get left out of this thing, and I'll be curious to find out whether or not it's Tennessee or Ole Miss, because it feels like Alabama and Georgia are probably going to get the benefit of the doubt in the way that these others that haven't made the college football playoff before will not. So we'll take a look at that. We'll be paying close attention to that. If you like the channel, please consider subscribing to the number 1 college football show. We do segments every single day, and we love talking about rankings in college football right here.